Hi, enjoyed the video.
One rainy morning in Portland, Mark Thompson was found dead in a quiet apartment, shattering the illusion of an ordinary life. The discovery sent shockwaves through the city, whispers of a perfect crime gone horribly wrong. Who was behind it? A trusted friend, a desperate stranger, or someone closer than anyone dared to imagine? The truth is buried in secrets too dark to guess, unraveling a story that will leave you questioning everything. Emily Thompson stood by the kitchen window, watching the rain drizzle onto the streets of Portland, Oregon. The city pulsed with its muted charm, pedestrians huddled under umbrellas, cars splashed through shallow puddles, and the distant murmur of the Willamette River drifted through the damp air. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, her eyes tracing the wet blur beyond their modest apartment near Laurelhurst Park. The space, with its scuffed hardwood floors and eclectic furniture, had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it pressed in on her, a quiet confinement she couldn't shake. Mark shuffled into the kitchen, wrestling with his tie. "Morning, Em," he said, planting a quick kiss on her cheek before reaching for the coffee pot. The earthy scent of brewing beans mixed with the warm hiss of pancakes on the stove. "Smells amazing." "Pancakes," Emily replied, offering a faint smile as she slid one onto a plate. "Figured you'd want something cozy before work." He grinned, settling at their cramped table. "You're the best." Mark was easy to please, a trait she'd once adored. He poured long hours into his job as a financial analyst at Sterling Enterprises, a rising firm downtown. His boss, Richard Sterling, was a towering figure in Portland, sharp-witted, successful, and magnetic. Mark revered him, often weaving tales of Richard's latest triumphs or musing about his own climb up the corporate ladder. Emily set the plate before him, leaning against the counter as her thoughts drifted. 7 years ago, when they'd married, Mark's ambition had been a beacon. He dreamed of a better life for them, and she'd shared that vision. But now, with him gone most days, she rattled around the apartment alone, haunted by plans that had faded. After their second miscarriage, she'd left her marketing job, expecting a family to fill the void. Instead, her days blurred into novels, yoga, and solitary park walks. It wasn't enough anymore. "Big day today?" she asked, pouring herself coffee to pierce the silence. Mark nodded, swallowing a bite. "Yeah, Richard's pitching to a new client. Could mean a promotion if it lands." "That's great," she said, her voice flat despite her effort. She wanted to muster excitement for him, but a truth gnawed at her. Mark's future surged forward while hers stagnated. He glanced up, brow furrowing. "You okay, Em? You've been off lately." She shrugged, sitting across from him. "Tired, I guess. Haven't been sleeping well. Might walk later to clear my head." Mark's hand brushed hers, warm but brief. "Things have been rough, I know, but we're close. If this promotion hits, we'll take that coastal trip you've wanted." Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." But as Mark finished eating and grabbed his briefcase, the ache deepened. He kissed her goodbye, promising to be home by 7, and left her with the rain-steady patter and her restless mind. She had the sleep aids on the counter, over-the-counter promises that delivered little rest. Later that week, Mark burst in, beaming. "Richard's hosting a company picnic by the river this weekend," he said, hanging his coat. "Family's invited. You should come, it'll be fun." Emily glanced at the drizzle-streaked window. "A picnic? In this?" Mark laughed, a sound that once lifted her spirits. "It's Portland, we manage. Big tents, food, drinks, maybe music. Come on, Em, it'll get you out." She hesitated. Company events weren't her thing, but the prospect of escaping the apartment's walls sparked something. "All right, I'll go." His face brightened. "Awesome. You'll meet everyone. Richard's asked about you, too." That jolted her. "He has?" "Yeah, he likes knowing who's behind his team." "He's solid, Em, you'll see." She nodded, curiosity tinged with unease. Mark painted Richard as larger than life, wealthy, charismatic, almost too polished. Still, she couldn't deny the intrigue. The picnic sprawled along the Willamette River, white tints dotting the grassy bank. The river flowed steadily, its dark surface mirroring the clouded sky and the undercurrent of Emily's discontent. Smoke from grills mingled with laughter and the gentle strum of a guitarist under the main tent. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of life. Mark guided her through the crowd, introducing colleagues. They were kind, offering smiles and chit-chat, but she felt detached until Richard Sterling approached. "Mark, good to see you," Richard said, clapping his shoulder. Then his eyes met Emily's, his smile shifting, warmer, intentional. "And this must be Emily. I've heard plenty about you." She blinked, struck by his presence. Richard was tall, dark hair swept back, with piercing blue eyes that held hers. Even in a casual suit, he radiated control, drawing the air toward him. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. His grip lingered, firm and deliberate. "Pleasure's mine," he replied, voice smooth. "Mark raves about your support. It's rare, with our hours." Emily glanced at Mark, who glowed with pride. "I try," she said, a flutter stirring under Richard's gaze. They talked briefly, Richard probing her interests, tossing wry remarks about Portland's quirks. His ease disarmed her. When Mark stepped away for drinks, she was alone with him. "So, Emily," Richard said, leaning closer, "what keeps you busy here? Must get lonely with Mark at the office." She faltered, unsettled by his tone. "Oh, yoga reading. I get by." His smile softened, eyes probing. "You deserve more than getting by, don't you?" Her breath caught. His words carried weight, tugging at something dormant. She laughed it off, tucking hair behind her ear. "Life's not always thrilling, I suppose." "True," he said, gaze steady. "But sometimes, thrills come when you're not looking." Mark returned with wine, breaking the tension. "Here, Em. Richard, you want one?" Richard declined. "I still on Emily. I'm fine. Just enjoying this." The afternoon unfolded with chatter and clinking glasses, but Emily's focus drifted to Richard. He moved through the crowd with effortless command, pulling people in. She tried anchoring herself to Mark, to their life, but Richard's words echoed. "Thrills come when you're not looking." A mix of guilt and curiosity stirred. Driving home, Mark buzzed about work, upbeat. Emily nodded, staring at the rain-slicked streets. He saw the day as progress toward their future. But she felt a shift, something dangerous simmering beneath her ordinary life, its pull undeniable. Emily stepped into the sleek lobby of Sterling Enterprises, the click of her heels softened by the plush carpet beneath her feet. The air carried the scent of polished wood and a hint of expensive cologne, a world apart from the damp, gray streets of Portland outside. In her hands, she clutched a paper bag with Mark's favorite sandwich, roast beef on rye, a small gesture meant to bridge the growing distance between them. Since the picnic a few days ago, where Richard Sterling's cryptic words, "Thrills come when you're not looking," had lodged themselves in her mind, Emily couldn't shake the unease, or the curiosity, that had taken root. "Hi. I'm here to see Mark Thompson," she said to the receptionist, a poised woman with a headset perched on her ear. "Mr. Thompson is in a meeting, but he should be out soon. You can wait over there," the woman replied, gesturing to a leather couch in the corner. Emily nodded and settled onto the cool cushions, smoothing her skirt over her knees. She hadn't visited Mark's office in months, and the sterile elegance of the space made her feel like an outsider. Her gaze drifted to the abstract paintings on the walls, swirls of blue and red that seemed to mock her with their ambiguity. "Emily," a warm, familiar voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see Richard Sterling striding toward her, his tailored suit accentuating his broad shoulders, his smile as disarming as it had been at the picnic. Her pulse quickened. "Richard, hi," she said, standing to meet him. "What a pleasant surprise. Are you here to see Mark?" he asked, his eyes flickering with interest. "Yes, I brought him lunch," she replied, holding up the bag as evidence. "That's thoughtful of you. He's tied up in a meeting with the team, but it shouldn't be long. Care to join me for a coffee while you wait?" Richard offered, his tone casual yet inviting. Emily hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where Mark was presumably buried in spreadsheets. "Sure, that would be nice," she said finally, following him to the office cafe. They settled at a small table by the window, rain streaking the glass in hypnotic patterns. Richard ordered 2 lattes, and as the barista set them down, he turned his full attention to Emily. "So, how have you been, Emily?" "It's been a while since the picnic," he said, his gaze steady and warm. "I've been okay," she replied, stirring her coffee to avoid meeting his eyes. "Just keeping busy with, life." He chuckled, a low, rich sound. "I understand. Sometimes life feels like a series of routines. But you're more than that, aren't you?" She frowned, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have dreams, passions. Mark's mentioned how creative you are. What do you enjoy doing?" he pressed, leaning forward slightly. Emily felt a flush creep up her neck. Mark hadn't talked about her interests in ages. Work had consumed him lately. "I used to paint," she admitted, surprised by her own candor. But I haven't in a while. Why not? Richard's curiosity seemed genuine, his head tilted as if her answer mattered. She shrugged, staring into her latte. Time, I guess. And inspiration. Perhaps you need a muse, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that felt foreign after days of strained silences with Mark. Maybe. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving through art, travel, and even the odd philosophical musing. Emily found herself sharing thoughts she'd buried for years, each word met with Richard's attentive nod or thoughtful question. When Mark finally emerged from his meeting, he found them mid-discussion, steam still rising from their half-empty cups. Hey, Em, sorry to keep you waiting, Mark said, then noticed Richard. Oh, Richard, I see you've met my wife. Indeed, and she's delightful, Richard replied, standing with a graceful nod. I'll leave you two to your lunch. Emily, it was a pleasure. As he walked away, Emily handed Mark the sandwich, but her mind lingered on Richard's parting words. You have dreams, passions, he'd said. For the first time in months, she felt seen. A few days later, Emily's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She answered, and Richard's smooth voice filled the line. Emily, it's Richard. I hope I'm not intruding, but I enjoyed our chat and wondered if you'd join me for lunch. I could use your perspective on a project. Her heart skipped a beat. Lunch? Sure, I guess. Great. Tomorrow at noon? There's a bistro on 23rd Avenue. Lovely spot, he said. I'll be there, she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The next day, Emily chose a floral dress Mark had once loved, telling herself it was just a business lunch. At the bistro, Richard waited at a corner table, a bottle of Pinot Gris gleaming in an ice bucket. Emily, you look stunning, he said, rising to greet her. Thank you, she murmured, a blush warming her cheeks. They ordered salmon for her, steak for him, and Richard outlined the project, a marketing campaign for a new client. I thought your background could offer fresh ideas, he said. Emily hadn't worked in marketing since before their daughter was born, but his confidence in her sparked something. I'm rusty, but I'll try, she said. As they brainstormed, Richard listened intently, his nods and questions coaxing her ideas into sharper focus. By dessert, she felt a rush of accomplishment she hadn't known in years. Before they parted, he handed her a small package. A little something for your help, he said. Inside was a silk scarf, its vibrant hues swirling like a sunset. It's beautiful, she breathed. It reminded me of you, he said simply. Emily wore the scarf home, its softness a secret against her skin. When Mark asked about her day, she murmured something about lunch with a friend, guilt prickling at the omission. Over the next few weeks, Emily slipped deeper into Richard's orbit. He invited her to a gallery opening, where she mingled with Portland's elite, her new dress, insisted upon by Richard, hugging her curves. You're radiant, he whispered as they stood before a Monet, his breath grazing her ear. She shivered, not from the chill gallery air. At a charity gala, they danced, his hand firm on her lower back, guiding her through the waltz with effortless grace. Emily felt alive, desired, a stark contrast to the quiet nights with Mark, filled with his snores and her restless thoughts. But Mark began to notice. One evening, he came home to find Emily twirling in a new dress, its price tag long discarded. Where'd that come from? He asked, brow furrowing. A thrift store, she lied, avoiding his gaze. Later, he remarked on her late returns, her distracted air. Book club, she deflected, but the excuse felt thin. The rift widened at home. Over dinner one night, Mark droned on about a client, oblivious to Emily's silence. When he forgot to rinse his plate, she snapped, Can't you do anything around here? He blinked, startled. What's wrong, Em? Nothing, she muttered. But in her mind, she compared Mark's mundane life to Richard's, his penthouse, his charm, his world of possibility. One evening, after a clandestine dinner with Richard, where his hand brushed hers across the table, lingering, she returned to find Mark awake. Where were you? He asked, concern lacing his voice. Out with friends, she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. Which friends? You didn't mention plans, he pressed. Does it matter? She shot back. I need space, Mark. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Em, what's happening to us? I don't know, she sighed, guilt warring with frustration. Maybe we're just growing apart. In the bedroom mirror, the silk scarf gleamed around her neck, a badge of her betrayal. Richard's world was intoxicating, and though she knew she was falling, Emily wasn't sure she wanted to stop. Mark Thompson sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee as the rain tapped a relentless rhythm against the window. It was Saturday morning, a time he and Emily once cherished. Lazy brunches, strolls through Laurelhurst Park, or spontaneous drives to the coast when the weather permitted. But those days felt distant now. Emily was always elsewhere, her excuses flimsy and vague, drifting away like the mist that blanketed Portland's streets. He glanced at the clock. 10:17 a.m. Emily had left an hour earlier, muttering something about a yoga class. Mark hadn't seen her yoga mat in months, but he didn't question her. The space between them had widened into a chasm, and every effort to close it seemed to push her further away. With a sigh, he stood and rinsed his mug in the sink, his movements automatic. His mind buzzed with unease. The previous night, Emily had returned late from yet another book club meeting, brushing past him with a new, expensive perfume trailing in her wake. He'd lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when his wife had become someone he no longer recognized. The doorbell jolted him from his thoughts. Opening the door, he found Jake, a coworker, holding a six-pack of local IPA. "Hey, man, thought you could use some company," Jake said, stepping inside. Mark managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Jake. Beer's a bit early, but I won't say no." They settled on the couch, cracking open bottles as the rain grew heavier outside. After a few sips, Jake's expression turned serious. "Listen, Mark, there's something I need to tell you." Mark's stomach nodded. "What is it?" Jake hesitated before continuing. "I saw Emily yesterday, at that new cafe on Hawthorne. She was with Richard." Mark blinked, the name hitting him like a blow. "Richard? As in our boss?" "Yeah," Jake said, his voice low. They looked close, laughing, leaning in. "I didn't want to say anything, but—" Mark's grip tightened on the bottle. "It's probably nothing. Richard's just friendly. He knows Emily through me." Jake shook his head. "Mark, I've seen friendly. This was different. And it's not the first time. A few weeks ago, I saw them at the art gallery downtown." A cold dread settled in Mark's chest. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wasn't sure," Jake admitted. "But after yesterday, I thought you should know." Mark stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. "I don't believe it. Emily wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" Jake asked softly. "Look, maybe it's innocent, but you need to talk to her." Mark nodded, his mind spinning. The late nights, the new clothes, her evasiveness, it all added up to something he didn't want to acknowledge. "Thanks, Jake. I'll handle it." After Jake left, Mark sat in silence, the beer forgotten. He needed evidence, something tangible before confronting Emily. Fueled by fear and resolve, he began to search. He started with her dresser, hands shaking as he sifted through drawers. In the back of her jewelry box, hidden under a mess of necklaces, he found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a bracelet, delicate gold with a single diamond charm. It wasn't from him. Their finances couldn't support such extravagance. His breath caught. Where had it come from? He replaced it carefully, his pulse racing. Next, he turned to her laptop, left open on the desk. The browser history was cleared. Unusual, since Emily rarely bothered. He checked her email, skimming through newsletters and receipts until he found a single unsent draft addressed to Richard. "Thinking of you. Can't wait for tomorrow." Mark's vision blurred. He slammed the laptop shut, nausea rising. This couldn't be real. Not Emily, not with Richard. He needed air. Grabbing his coat, he stepped into the rain, the cold drops stinging his face as he wandered the city's gray streets. How had they reached this point? Was it his fault? Too many hours at work, too little attention to her unhappiness? When he returned, Emily was home, humming as she arranged lilies, her favorite, in a vase. "Hey, you're drenched," she said, her smile fading as she noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" Mark swallowed hard. "Emily, we need to talk." She set the vase down, her body tensing. "About what?" "I know about Richard," he said, his voice barely audible. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through before she feigned confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me," Mark snapped, his pent-up anger spilling out. "Jake saw you together. And I found the bracelet, the email. How long has this been going on?" Emily's face crumpled, tears brimming. "Mark, it's not what you think." Then what is it? He demanded, stepping closer. Because it looks like you're having an affair with my boss. She flinched at the word, hugging herself. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Mark felt the floor drop beneath him. How long? A few months, she whispered. Months. He ran a hand through his wet hair, torn between disbelief and agony. Why, Emily? What did I do wrong? Nothing, she said quickly. It's not you, it's me. I was lonely, and Richard. He made me feel special. Special? Mark's laugh was bitter. He's using you, Emily. You're just a game to him. No, she insisted, shaking her head. He cares about me. He listens, he understands. Understands what? Mark interrupted. That you're married? That you're supposed to be committed to me. Emily's tears fell, but she stayed silent, the quiet heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Mark exhaled, exhaustion overtaking his anger. What do you want, Emily? Do you want to be with him? She looked away, her voice shaky. I don't know. I'm confused. Mark's heart broke. He'd braced for denial or defiance, not this uncertainty. I need time to think, he said, heading for the door. Mark, wait, she called, but he was already gone, the door slamming shut. Emily sank to the floor, sobs shaking her. She'd never intended to hurt Mark, but Richard's charm had been a lifeline, pulling her from the monotony that had smothered her. Now, facing the loss of her husband, she felt unmoored. Her phone buzzed, Richard's name on the screen. She answered with a trembling hello. Emily, darling, are you free tonight? I booked us a suite at the Nines, he purred. She closed her eyes, temptation clashing with guilt. Mark knows, she whispered. A pause. What does he know? About us. He found out. Richard's tone cooled. And what did you tell him? That it's over, she lied, the words bitter. Good, he said, relieved. We'll lay low for a while. Meet me tomorrow instead. Emily agreed, hanging up with a sinking heart. She couldn't sustain the lies, the betrayal. Yet the idea of losing Richard, of returning to her old life, terrified her. That night, she lay awake, the bed empty beside her. Mark's absence ached, but part of her craved the excitement Richard offered. Caught between loyalty and longing, Emily faced a choice that would shape her future, one with consequences she couldn't yet grasp. Emily lay nestled against Richard's chest, the soft glow of the hotel room lamp casting a warm light over their entwined bodies. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something faintly spicy, wrapped around her like a cocoon, shutting out the world beyond these four walls. For a moment, she allowed herself to forget the chaos waiting for her at home, the hurt in Mark's eyes, the lies piling up like unpaid bills. Here, with Richard, she felt alive, desired, free. Emily, Richard murmured, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her shoulder, imagine if we could be like this all the time. No sneaking around, no guilt. Just us. She sighed, her breath catching. But Mark. Mark is a good man, Richard said, his voice smooth as silk, but he's not the man for you. You know that. You deserve more, adventure, passion, a life without limits. He shifted, reaching into the bedside drawer, and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a pair of diamond earrings, their facets catching the light like tiny stars. Richard, they're stunning, Emily gasped, sitting up to admire them. Not as stunning as you, he replied, fastening them to her ears with a tenderness that made her heart ache. A small token of what our life could be together. Emily touched the earrings, their weight unfamiliar yet thrilling. They're beautiful, but I can't. You can't, he insisted, cupping her face in his hands. You deserve to be spoiled, Emily. Let me give you the world. She wanted to believe him, to lose herself in the fantasy he painted. But a nagging doubt lingered. Was this real, or was she just another conquest for a man like Richard? Meanwhile, across town, Mark sat on the edge of their bed, a gold bracelet clutched in his hand. Its delicate chain and diamond charm mocked him, a tangible symbol of his wife's betrayal. Anger surged through him, hot and consuming, mixed with a deep, aching loss. He'd found it hidden in Emily's dresser, a gift he hadn't given her, one that reeked of Richard's extravagance. He couldn't let this continue. He needed to confront Richard, to demand that he stay away from Emily. The thought of facing his boss, the man he once admired, filled him with dread, but the alternative was unbearable. Grabbing his keys, Mark stormed out of the apartment, the rain pelting his face as he strode to his car. The drive to Sterling Enterprises was a blur, his mind racing with what he would say, what he would do. Mark burst into Richard's office, ignoring the startled secretary who tried to intercept him. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression calm, almost amused. Mark, what a surprise, he said. leaning back in his chair. To what do I owe this visit? You know why I'm here, Mark growled, his fist clenched at his sides. Stay away from my wife. Richard's smirk widened. Your wife? Emily is a grown woman. She makes her own choices. Choices? Mark spat, stepping closer. You're manipulating her, taking advantage of her. Richard stood, his height and presence imposing. Let me give you some advice, Mark. If you can't keep your wife satisfied, that's your problem, not mine. Mark's vision reddened. He lunged across the desk, grabbing Richard by the collar. You bastard. Security guards rushed in, pulling Mark away as he struggled, his rage blinding. Richard straightened his tie, unfazed. Get him out of here, he ordered. And Mark, I'd think twice before coming back. As the guards escorted him out, Mark shouted. This isn't over, Richard. You'll pay for this. Later that evening, Emily met Richard at their usual spot, a secluded bench overlooking the Willamette River. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool, but Emily's mind was anything but calm. Mark came to my office today, Richard said casually, as if discussing the weather. He was quite emotional. Emily's eyes widened. What did he say? He accused me of stealing you away, Richard replied, his tone dismissive. I told him the truth, that you deserve better than what he can offer. Emily felt a pang of guilt, sharp and twisting. Richard, maybe we should stop. This is hurting him too much. Richard took her hand, his grip firm, almost possessive. Emily, don't let his weakness hold you back. We're meant to be together. Mark is just an obstacle, one we can overcome. But as he spoke, Emily noticed a coldness in his eyes, a calculation that sent a shiver down her spine. Was this the man she thought she knew? The next day, Emily found herself at Richard's apartment, waiting for him to return from a meeting. As she wandered through the living room, her eyes fell on a stack of letters on his desk. Curiosity piqued. She picked one up and read the elegant handwriting. My dearest Richard, I can't stop thinking about our night together. Emily's stomach churned. She flipped through the letters, each one from a different woman, each professing love and desire. Her hands trembled as she set them down, her mind racing. When Richard returned, she confronted him, holding up the letters. Who are they? Richard's face hardened. Old flames. It's over with them. Are there others? Emily demanded, her voice shaking. Am I just another one of your conquests? Emily, you're the only one who matters, he said, pulling her into his arms. Those women meant nothing. You're different. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt lingered, festering like a wound. That night, as they lay in bed, Richard turned to her, his expression serious. Emily, we can't keep living like this. Mark will never let you go. What do you mean? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. I mean, we need to find a way to be together permanently, without Mark in the picture. Emily sat up, her heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes, life shifts unexpectedly, Richard said softly, his eyes locked on hers. If Mark were no longer part of our world, we could finally be together, free from everything holding us back. Emily's mind spun. Was he hinting at something unthinkable? I can't, she whispered, her voice trembling. That's impossible. Think about it, Richard urged, his voice persuasive. We could be happy, Emily. Free from his control, free to live the life we deserve. She lay back down, her thoughts racing. The idea was monstrous, yet a small, dark part of her wondered if it was the only way out. Could she really consider such a thing? What had she become? As Richard drifted to sleep beside her, Emily stared at the ceiling, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. The path before her was fraught with danger, and she knew that whatever choice she made, there would be no turning back. Emily stared at the photo album on her lap, its pages a gallery of a life she barely recognized. Mark's smile beamed from their wedding day, his arm around her, full of hope. Another photo captured them laughing by a Columbia Gorge waterfall, mist curling around them like a promise. Tears stung her eyes as she traced his face with her finger. That warmth had faded, replaced by silence and distance. Richard had filled that void with whispers of passion and a life beyond Portland's gray drizzle. But now, knowing his true intentions, she felt trapped between the husband she'd betrayed and the lover who'd deceived her. She closed the album, her resolve wavering. Richard's words from their cafe meeting echoed. Obstacles need to be removed. His tone had been soft, almost reasonable, but the implication chilled her. She'd gone to his office that night, using his key, and found the folder, financial records framing Mark for embezzlement, photos of her, emails with Veronica plotting their takeover. Richard didn't love her. He was using her to destroy Mark and seize Sterling Enterprises. The betrayal cut deep, but so did her guilt. She'd let this happen, let Richard pull her away from Mark. The apartment door creaked open, and Mark stepped in, rain dripping from his coat. You're still up, he said, his voice weary but gentle. I couldn't sleep either. She wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. Just thinking. Want some tea? He nodded, shedding his coat. Sure. Rough day at work. Richard's pushing everyone hard. Emily's stomach twisted as she moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle. She had to tell him about Richard's scheme, but how? And what about her own mistakes? As the water heated, she pulled a jar of chamomile from the cabinet, and beside it, a bottle of sleep aid she'd bought weeks ago for her restless nights. Her hand hovered over it, Richard's voice whispering in her mind, Mark's an obstacle. You okay? Mark called, stepping into the kitchen. Yeah, she said, too quickly, turning to face him. Just tired. He studied her, concern etching his features. We need to talk, don't we? She nodded, her throat tight. Mark, there's something I have to tell you about Richard. His brow furrowed. What about him? He's framing you, she blurted, the words tumbling out. Embezzlement. He's been using me to get to you, to take the company with some woman named Veronica. Mark's face paled. What? How do you know? I found proof in his office, documents, emails. He's been lying to me to us. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mark. I got caught up in him. Mark sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. I knew something was off. But you, with him. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, voice breaking. I was lost, and he made me feel something. But it's over. I want us to fix this. He looked at her, pain and love warring in his eyes. Can we? After everything? I'll try, she whispered, desperate to believe it herself. The kettle whistled, piercing the silence. Emily turned off the stove, her hands shaking as she poured the tea. Mark's forgiveness was more than she deserved, but Richard's shadow loomed. What if he came after them? What if Mark confronted him and lost everything? She glanced at the sleep aids again, her mind spiraling. Richard's suggestion, removing the obstacle, felt like a dark seed taking root. Just to calm things, to buy time, she told herself. Her fingers trembled as she hesitated over the tea, a quiet resolve settling in her eyes before she stirred it and handed Mark the cup. Here, she said, handing him the cup. It'll help you relax. He took it, sipping slowly. Thanks, Em. We'll figure this out together. They sat in fragile silence, the tea steaming between them. Mark's eyelids drooped, his words slurring. I'm so tired. He set the cup down, half empty, and stumbled to the couch. Just need a minute. Emily watched, her heart pounding as he slumped, his breathing slowing. Too slow. Panic clawed at her. Mark. She shook him, but he didn't stir. Mark, wake up. His chest barely moved, and dread flooded her. This wasn't calm, this was wrong. She grabbed the bottle, reading the label. Warning, do not exceed 1 dose. She'd given him 2, maybe more in her haste. She dialed 911, her voice shrill. Help? My husband, he's not breathing. But as she waited, staring at his still form, she knew it was too late. The operator's voice faded into static as guilt consumed her. What had she done? Emily stood frozen in the kitchen, the empty teacup trembling in her hands. Mark lay slumped on the couch, his chest still, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant patter of Portland's rain against the windows. She'd meant to free herself, to escape the suffocating tangle of her life with Richard's whispered promises echoing in her mind. But now, staring at Mark, regret crashed over her like a wave. What had she done? Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the cup clattering beside her. She called 911 in a panic, her voice a jagged sob. My husband, he's not breathing. The operator had urged her to stay calm, but calm was a distant memory. She'd hung up, her mind racing. The folder from Richard's office, proof of his scheme to frame Mark, lay on the table, a lifeline she'd clung to before this nightmare unfolded. Now it felt like a cruel irony. Sirens wailed closer, jolting her into action. She couldn't let them find it, not yet. She grabbed the folder and shoved it into a drawer, her hands shaking as she wiped the cup with her sleeve, smearing any trace of her touch. She didn't know why she did it, instinct, fear, but the act felt final, sealing her guilt. The paramedics burst in, followed by police. Emily played the part, tears streaming as she clutched Mark's hand, now cold. I found him like this, she choked out. He was tired, said he needed rest. They moved him to a stretcher, their faces grim. We're sorry, ma'am, one said. He's gone. Gone. The word carved a hollow space inside her. As they wheeled him away, an officer lingered, his notebook open. Can you walk me through what happened? Emily nodded, her story spilling out. Mark came home. They talked, he drank tea, fell asleep. She kept it simple, her voice breaking naturally. The officer jotted notes, his expression neutral, but his eyes lingered on the kitchen counter. Hours later, alone in the apartment, Emily sat in the dark, the folder clutched to her chest. She hadn't planned this, had she? Richard's words had wormed into her. Obstacles need to be removed, but the choice had been hers. She'd wanted freedom, not this emptiness. Her phone buzzed, Richard's name flashing. She answered, her voice flat. Emily, darling, I heard about Mark, he said, his tone smooth. Such a tragedy. Are you all right? You heard? She whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. A friend at the precinct called. I'm coming over, we need to talk. He arrived within the hour, his suit impeccable despite the late hour. He pulled her into an embrace, but she stiffened, his warmth a lie. This changes everything, he said, stepping back. With Mark gone, you're free. We can be together. Emily stared at him, the folder burning in her hands behind her back. Free, she echoed. You wanted this, didn't you? Richard's smile faltered. What are you implying? I found your plans, she said, pulling the folder into view. The embezzlement, Veronica, framing Mark. You used me. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic breaking his composure. Emily, you're upset. Give me that. I'll explain. No, she snapped, stepping back. You don't get to twist this. Mark's gone because of you, because of what you made me think I had to do. Richard lunged for the folder, but she dodged, clutching it tighter. You're in over your head, he hissed. Give it to me, or you'll regret it. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Emily's heart leapt. Had the police returned? She shoved past Richard, opening the door to find Jake, Mark's coworker, his face pale. Emily, I came as soon as I heard, Jake said, then froze, seeing Richard. What's he doing here? Leaving, Emily said, her voice steadying. Jake, call the police. I have something they need to see. Richard's face twisted. You're making a mistake, he warned, but he backed toward the door, disappearing into the night. The police returned at dawn, Jake by Emily's side as she handed over the folder. Richard Sterling's been embezzling from the company, she explained, her voice hollow. He forged Mark's name to cover it. There's more emails with a woman named Veronica. An officer skimmed the documents, his brow furrowing. This is serious. We'll need to bring him in. There's something else, Emily said, her throat tightening. Mark, it wasn't just exhaustion. I think Richard had a hand in it. She didn't confess her role, not yet. The tea, her trembling resolve, it was her burden, one she'd carry until she couldn't. The officer nodded, radioing for backup. We'll look into it. Stay here. They found Richard at his penthouse, packing a suitcase. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, emails, even a burner phone linking him to Veronica, who'd been arrested in Seattle. But the real blow came later, an autopsy report, delivered days after, showing traces of sleep aids in Mark's system far beyond a safe dose. Detectives returned, their questions sharper. Mrs. Thompson, we found an empty bottle in your trash. Care to explain? Emily's heart stopped. She tossed it in a panic, not thinking they'd search. I take them sometimes, she stammered. Mark must have taken too much by accident, the detective finished, skeptical. We're testing the cup, too. If there's more to this, we'll find out. Under their gaze, Emily broke. It was Richard, she sobbed. He pushed me, told me Mark was in the way. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted it to stop. The confession spilled out, her affair, Richard's manipulation, her desperate act with the tea. She didn't detail the moment, letting her tears fill the gaps. The detectives listened, their faces unreadable. Richard's trial was swift. The embezzlement charges stuck, bolstered by Veronica's testimony after she cut a deal. But Mark's death added conspiracy. Richard's insistence that Mark be removed painted him as the mastermind. He was sentenced to 15 years, his charm useless behind bars. Emily faced her own reckoning. Her lawyer argued coercion, her emotional collapse under Richard's influence. The charge was manslaughter, unintentional but reckless. She took a plea, 5 years, a lighter sentence for her cooperation. As she stood in court, The weight of her actions settled fully. Mark was gone, and she'd played a part, however manipulated. In her cell, Emily traced the lines of her wedding ring, long since removed. The rain tapped against the window, a constant companion. She'd sought freedom, but found only shadows and a price paid in loss and bars.
Thanks for watching. Bye.